Welcome to another video. Tonight we have 9 stories, starting off with a creepy tale involving a hospital, and moving into stories of home intruders, sleepwalking, and much more. If you have a story of your own, it can be sent to reddit.com/r/slumberreads. These videos do take me quite a bit of time to create, so if you're feeling generous, and if you feel this video is worth one, please be sure to drop a like rating. Subscribing if you're new is also greatly appreciated. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. I'm not really sure if this is the right place to post this, but I think that it is worth sharing. I've spent the last 2 days thinking about it, worrying about it, and I just need to share what I have found, and hopefully someone might know more about it. It all started when I was looking at reviews on the internet for my local hospital, as I am going there in a few days for a small procedure. I just wanted to make sure that the doctors there are reliable and good at what they do. Anyway, as I was scrolling through the reviews, I came across one that, for some reason, caught my attention. I have attached the review here, but have changed or removed any names and locations for privacy reasons. Staff were very friendly and my procedure was successful. May 14th, 2017. I visited the South Hill Community Hospital 6 weeks ago for a procedure on my eyes. Cataracts. The staff there were very kind and looked after my every need before I went into surgery. They made sure that I was comfortable and clear on what the operation would entail and what to expect afterwards. When it came time for my operation to start, I was taken through by a lovely nurse. I think her name was redacted. That made me feel relaxed by talking to me and distracting me from what was going to happen. The same nurse also gently injected the needle I needed to place me under anesthetic. From what I hear, the surgery was very successful, and I awoke feeling a bit groggy by the staff at South Hill attended to my every need. I did have one moment that was a bit scary though, and maybe my own small complaints about my experience. About an hour after I had woken up from surgery, I suddenly lost all vision, and everything went completely black. I began to panic and scream a bit, and I heard one of the staff let out a deep, long laugh, almost like they were laughing at me. I'm overlooking this though because of how fantastic the rest of the staff were at calming me down. Luckily, my vision did return after maybe a minute or two, and the doctors said they weren't too sure as to what happened. I didn't really care what happened. The main thing is that I could see again. Since then, I've had no trouble with my eyes, and I fondly remember my experience of South Hill Community Hospital. The reviews seemed fairly normal, but I was a bit concerned about the doctor who was laughing at a patient, and so I read the response the hospital gave to this review, which I have also attached. Hello, Redacted. Thank you for your kind words about our hospital. We are glad to hear that you had a mostly excellent experience, and that your recovery is going well. In regard to the doctor that laughed at you, we have spoken to other staff that were present at that time, and they have all said that no doctor laughed, and that they were all trying their best to help you. We would never allow a doctor to laugh at a patient, and if it does come out that someone did, then the matter will be dealt with accordingly. Best of luck with your recovery. South Hill Community Hospital, May 16th, 2017. For some reason that I am unsure of, I decided to look at what other reviews this man had left. I think maybe because of the laughing doctor that the hospital claimed didn't happen. I wanted to see if this reviewer had any other weird experiences elsewhere. This led me down a rabbit hole that I wish I hadn't gone down. The next review of his that I read was for a local restaurant, and I have attached the review and the restaurant's response here. I wasn't aware that this was a themed restaurant, but it was a nice surprise. May 21st, 2017. I booked a table at Redacted for me and my brother to go out and enjoy some Italian food. Unfortunately, my brother had to cancel, and I thought I would still make the most of my night and still go out for dinner by myself. The staff that greeted me at the door were very friendly, and they showed me to my table and allowed me to choose a glass of wine from a very impressive wine list. I enjoyed my wine, and I ordered my meal, which didn't take long to arrive, which I was very pleased with. I began eating my puttanesca, and it was very delicious. Maybe the best Italian dish I have ever eaten. I was about halfway through my meal when things got a little bit odd. Suddenly all the lights went off and the restaurant was left in the dark. At first, I thought it was my eyes. Long story. But I began to see a dark outline of a figure standing in front of me. The figure was quite tall and appeared to have long fingers that had very long nails at the end of them. The figure took a step towards me and lifted up one of the fingers and pointed its long fingernail towards me. It then let out a loud growling noise when suddenly the lights flicked back on and he was gone. At first, I was shocked as to what happened, but I soon figured out that this is one of those themed restaurants, and this one must be horror themed. Once I knew that, I began to realize how much I had enjoyed the experience, and I feel it definitely added to my night. My only advice, however, would be to make it more clear that this is horror themed, as some people might not enjoy it as much as me. Dear Redacted, thank you for your review, but we are a bit puzzled. We are not a horror-themed restaurant. We're just a small business that specializes in Italian cuisine. At first, after reading your review, I thought maybe you had written the review about a different restaurant and accidentally posted it on our page. I decided to check security footage though, and I think I have managed to spot you, or someone that looks a lot like your profile picture. And I can confirm that no lights went out or that anyone was standing in front of you. I did notice one thing though, and that is, while you were eating, your eyes suddenly rolled back into your head and you sat motionless for about 30 seconds before your eyes returned to normal, and you looked puzzled but then continued eating. I hope that everything is okay, and that you are alright. Regards, Management at Redacted, June 2nd, 2017. I was getting more and more concerned about this reviewer at this point, and continued to read his other reviews, and read his review after that one, and found he had a similar experience elsewhere. The following is a review he posted about a live show he attended. The play was fairly good, but the actors got a bit too close for my liking. May 28th, 2017. Based on a recent experience at a horror-themed restaurant that gave me a bit of a fun fright, I found that I've become interested in finding something else that can give me a bit of a spook. That's when I found that there was this play being performed at the Silverstone Theater. As this is near my house, I thought that I would give it a go. I read some other reviews, and read that it was supposed to be quite scary and would give everyone a bit of a fright. This sounded like something I would be quite interested in. When the play began, I found myself enjoying it quite a bit. It provided a few good scares and a few good laughs. I found that it did get a bit boring during the middle section, but it is the ending that I have most issue with. I was sitting there watching the play, and during one of the moments that was dark and suspenseful, suddenly one of the actors appeared quite close to me. In fact, he was only inches away from my face and he was staring straight into my eyes. His eyes were the only thing I could see. The rest of his face was still in silhouette, but he must have had some contact lenses on because his eyes were a light yellow tinge around the whites of his eyes, and they were a dark red in the center. He then began to laugh a deep, raspy laugh, and I could feel his hot, stinking breath against my face. Then, as quickly as he appeared, he disappeared again. I thought that this was a fairly cheap jump scare that for some reason singled me out. I think it is irresponsible for this production to not warn audience members that the actors may appear so close to them. At the time of posting this, there has been no response from the theater or the production company that put on the show. I was equal parts worried and curious. I needed to know more about this man and his strange reviews. I then read his next review, and while it was not as eventful as the previous ones, It was still strange. The optometrist didn't even try to help me when I came to him for help. June 6th, 2017. I've been having a strange problem with my eyes in the past few days, and so I turned to the optimistic optometrist for help. But help is not something he can provide. When I got there, I told him that for the past few days I have had a weird shaking in my eyes. At first he seemed concerned, which is the reason I am giving you 2 stars and not 1. And he did begin to run a few tests as to why that would be. After trying a couple of things, he quickly dismissed the idea that my eyes were shaking as being in my head, and he couldn't find any evidence that my eyes were shaking. He was quick to get me out of the door and told me to see a doctor if the problem persists. Well, the problem has persisted. In fact, it has gotten worse. I constantly feel a strong shake from behind my eyes, and it almost feels like something is trying to get out. It has gotten to the point where it is almost unbearable, and thanks to you, I wasn't able to find any comfort. There wasn't any reply to this review from any other users or from the optometrist at the time of posting. I was very concerned for this man now. He appears to have a serious issue, and almost every review seems to involve his eyes. The final review I can find from this user is one for a pawn shop, and the review and the response from the pawn shop may be the most concerning. Why advertise that you buy any item when you clearly do not? June 8th, 2017. I came into your store this morning and tried to sell you an item but was told to leave and that they would not buy what I had to sell. However, the sign out of the front of your store reads, "We buy any item." This is clearly not true. I told you that I would happily remove the item from its cases if that made it easier. But this is the moment when I was told to leave. I will not be returning to your store, as it appears you are lying in your advertising. Very disappointed. Can you please remove this review? It reflects very badly on my small business to have a bad review, especially when you didn't explain the full story, which is, you came into my store, quite distressed, and began yelling and begging me to take an item from you. You explained that I wouldn't need to buy it, that I could just have it. At first, I thought you were trying to give me an illegal item that you needed to get rid of quickly. This is why I refused at first, but then you continued to explain what the item was. I know the sign out the front of the store says that we buy any item, but I am telling you right now, we definitely will not buy your eyes off of you, even if you do take them out of their cases, as you said. So again, I would appreciate it if you did remove this review. From Redacted. After reading this final review, I was desperate to know more, but the reviews ended there. He never wrote another one. I then did a bit of detective work and looked at the Facebook page that was attached to his account and managed to find his brother. I then looked up any reviews his brother may have written, and I managed to find the only review that his brother had written. I have attached this review and the response here. Overall, happy with service, apart from one thing. I recently had to use the services of South Hill Funeral Home for my brother's funeral. The funeral service that they provided was very touching, and is what we wanted, and more importantly, it is what my brother would have wanted. Nice words were said, and the place looked lovely. There were nice flowers around the chapel. The funeral was an open casket funeral, as per our request. This was something that we had been very specific about, and had given the funeral home specific instructions about. This is what my one complaint is about. Given the way my brother died, we asked for his eyes to definitely be closed. But when we viewed the body, what I saw will always haunt me. Him lying there, with his eyelids opened, and the black holes where his eyes used to be staring up at me. Dear Redacted, I'm glad to hear that the service was what your brother would have wanted. I am concerned, however, about your complaint. We made sure to follow all of your instructions in regards to preparing the body, and we made sure that his eyes were closed. I do also remember that when I moved his body after the service, his eyes were most definitely firmly closed. I am unsure how they would have been open when you viewed the body, but I profusely apologize for this mistake. Kind regards, Management of South Hill Funeral Home. The review from his brother did tell me one thing. The man was now dead. This made me need to find out more about his death, and so I trawled through the internet, searching for his name, his brother's name, and any of the locations that he wrote reviews for. Eventually I managed to find one newspaper article from a fairly small local paper that I believe is about this man. I have attached this article here. Local man's death may have been mistakenly ruled a suicide. The coroner's report has just been released of the death of a local man. The man in question was found dead in his own apartment. He was found with scratches on his face and with both of his eyes removed from his head, and were instead on the floor in front of him. It was originally believed to be a suicide, but the recent coroner's report has raised more questions than it provided answers. One of those questions is, how was this really a suicide? This is now being brought into question because of two key findings in the report. The first is a small, dark footprint that has been found just in front of where the body was found. The second finding is that it appears the man may have not removed his own eyes, like originally thought, but instead they have been pushed out of his head from the inside. This is all the information I'm able to find out about the mysterious death, and I hope that more information may be uncovered, so that there can be some answers, but I doubt it. I had just finished running a cloudy afternoon's worth of monotonous errands when I spotted the handmade sign advertising a nearby yard sale. Bored by the day's tedium and looking to kill some time before a 3 o'clock appointment, I drove to the address scribbled on the sign in thick marker and arrived at a secluded, modestly sized brick house with fold-out tables placed along its driveway. As I browsed through labeled cardboard boxes filled with the sales offerings, I found most of their contents to be rather lackluster. Faded clothes, chipped dishes, threadbare bedding, and what amounted to little more than unremarkable clutter. Eventually a large box that held an assortment of books captured my eye. Before I could inspect them beyond a cursory glance, a sudden voice interrupted me. "Excuse me, sir." I turned around to see a middle-aged woman standing behind me. "I don't mean to be impolite," she stated in a tone that was equally apologetic and rushed, but I was actually just about to start putting everything away. It's supposed to rain soon and I really don't want to get caught in the middle of a downpour. She pointed at the book box. "If you take that off my hands right now, you can have it for $5. It'd be one less thing for me to deal with." "What kind of books are they?" I asked curiously. They seemed pretty varied. I didn't recognize a lot of the titles, but there were quite a few about the ocean. I had no idea Uncle Lawrence was such a big reader until I found all the books scattered throughout his house. The woman gestured towards the slew of boxes surrounding us. Everything here belonged to him. He passed away recently, and I'm the only family left to handle his estate. "Oh, very sorry to hear that." "Thanks. I can't say that we were close, though. He tended to keep to himself. Packing up his things was like walking through a stranger's house." She looked at her watch and fixed me with a tight smile that failed to entirely conceal her eagerness to be rid of me. "So, are you interested in the books?" Minutes later, I was setting the heavy box into the back seat of my car. By the time my appointment was over, raindrops were falling steadily from the darkened sky. I went home, poured myself a glass of wine, and settled in to examine my purchase. It didn't take long for buyer's remorse to strike. Many of the books were dog-eared paperbacks sporting cracked spines, and the rest were frayed, time-worn oceanography volumes with jaundiced pages. I kept hoping to find a hidden gem, but instead each title I unearthed was both terribly dull and devoid of any resale value. I was about to deem the entire thing a total waste of a $5 bill when I saw a writing journal resting at the bottom of the box. slender and bound with smooth canvas. It appeared to have been mistaken for a jacketless book and tossed into the box without a second glance. I opened it to discover an entry penned by a trembling, uneven hand. 30 years ago, the entrance began. I experienced something terrifying. I blinked in surprise, taken aback by the ominous scrawled words, before continuing to read. I never found the courage to talk about what happened that night, and I strongly doubt anyone would have ever believed me anyway. Fear of being deemed a liar or considered insane has kept me silent for decades, but none of that matters now. Perhaps writing this down will prove to be therapeutic for me, or perhaps I'm merely wasting paper, ink, and the little time I have left in this world. Back then I had every reason to be happy. I was young and healthy, vibrant and ambitious. I enjoyed a great deal of success at work, including a recent promotion, and I'd just moved into a new high-rise apartment by the beach. Each morning I stepped out onto my balcony, breathed in the scent of the ocean, and looked forward to what the day would bring. One night I couldn't sleep. I'd been up late preparing for an important meeting I had the next day, and I was unusually tense. I decided to take a stroll down to the beach in the hopes that its cool air would ease my nerves. Moonlight guided me as I walked barefoot onto the sand, carrying my shoes in one hand and my jacket in the other. I closed my eyes and listened to the relaxing sound of the lapping waves. No one else was there. I felt like that soothing moment of absolute tranquility had been created just for me. Looking back, I wish it had never ended. Eventually I opened my eyes and was immediately startled to see a man stumbling out of the shadows a few feet ahead of me. When moonlight illuminated his wrinkled face, I saw that it had been stricken with an expression of absolute panic. Sallow and feeble, with age lines etched deeply into his withered features. He looked to be no younger than 80. His wide, reddened eyes gazed at me imploringly as tears streamed down his sunken cheeks. The old man wore a gray suit and a long gray trench coat that hung limply on his decrepit frame. Sand clung to his shoes like dust, and his thin, colorless hair was widely disheveled, as if he had been tearing at it in anguished fistfuls. "Sir?" I called out worriedly. "Are you all right?" "My wife," he wailed, his voice racked with despair. "I can't find her anywhere." "Maybe I can help." Though I spoke in the most calming tone I could muster, inwardly I was quite rattled by his profound distress. "When did you last see your wife?" "Almost an hour ago," he babbled frantically, teetering on the verge of collapsing into unintelligible sobs. "We were walking along the beach. I stopped to tie my shoe, and when I looked back up, she was just gone." My stomach dropped. I glanced towards the water. I fought to push a grim sequence from my mind. An elderly woman's brittle form becoming silently engulfed by the ocean, sinking haplessly into its merciless depths before later returning to the surface to lifelessly float face down and bloated. "Let's get you somewhere where you can sit and rest," I said gently. "I'll call the police." "No," the old man cried fervently. "You can't leave me." "There's a payphone just a few minutes away. The sooner the police get here, the sooner they can start searching for your wife." "But there isn't enough time for that," he protested. Couldn't you just swim out and look for her?" "No, sir, it's too dark, and I wouldn't be able to see." "Please." The old man begged urgently, bursting into fresh tears. "She's all that I have left." "I'll be right back," I assured him. "I promise." Before he could speak another word, I turned away and broke into a run. I was certain the ocean had already claimed his ill-fated wife and added her to its drowned ranks, but I still hoped against hope that I was wrong. I'd just reached the payphone when I heard the close sound of weeping. Turned around and found myself face to face with the old man. I gawked at him in confusion, stunned by his speed. He had appeared pitifully frail only moments ago, like so much as a swift pace would fracture his spindly legs. "Why did you leave?" he asked in a wounded voice, as if I had committed an unforgivable act of cruelty and caused him tremendous pain. "I told you," I replied slowly, by now more than a little uneasy. "I need to call the police." The old man shook his head. "There's nothing they can do." He stated gravely, "Well, how else are we going to find your wife?" "I don't have a wife, Lawrence." I froze. Goosebumps prickled across my arms. "How do you know my name?" I whispered. His devastated expression vanished in an instant as the corners of his wilted lips turned upwards into a sly smile. The old man lunged towards me with frightening agility, and the next thing I knew I was running as fast as my legs could carry me. An incredible surge of fear flooded my veins. Not once did I dare look back, afraid of what I might see. When I finally reached the safety of my 10th-story apartment, I slammed the door shut before barricading it with a chair. My heart pounded thickly in my chest as I strained my ears to listen for approaching footsteps. Several tense but uneventful moments passed, followed by several more. Eventually I dared to breathe a faint, shaky sigh of relief. Then I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. A crashing wave of dread swept over me. I turned slowly towards the glass door leading to my apartment balcony and saw the old man standing outside, grinning wickedly as he drummed his fingernails on the glass. Tap, tap, tap. I watched in horror as dark seawater poured from the old man's mouth and nose and trickled from his eyes, soaking his clothes and the balcony floor. The horrid stench of decay and rotted seaweed filled my nostrils to mingle hideously with the ocean's sun. I tore my gaze away from the ghastly figure on the balcony. It bolted into my bedroom before locking the door and sinking onto the floor. I sat there helplessly for what felt like an agonizing eternity, drenched with panic-laden sweat and nearly hysterical with fear, desperately praying that the old man wouldn't shatter the glass and step foot into my home. My indescribable terror reached dizzying heights and grew more excruciating with every passing minute, rendering me certain that I would soon be driven mad by unbearable apprehension. Though I heard nothing but benign quiet for the rest of the night, it wasn't until the first rays of sunlight began to peer through the bedroom window that I finally summoned enough courage to rise to my feet and cautiously open the bedroom door. The apartment appeared as ordinary and untouched as it had been before I left for the beach. The only evidence of my incomprehensible ordeal was the chair that still propped against the front door, and the dark puddle drying on the balcony. I went to work in a daze. My memories of that day exist only in hazy fragments. My ashen reflection staring back at me in the restroom mirror as I splashed cold water onto my face. The incessant ringing of my office phone as I sat numbly at my desk. My visibly frustrated boss rubbing his temples as I mumbled little more than a scant few words during the meeting I'd so painstakingly prepared for. I felt like I was staggering through a heavy fog with no end in sight, where I could think of nothing but the night's horrifying events. Exhausted and overwhelmed, I left the office early to go home. I took a sleeping pill and climbed into bed, where I soon drifted off into what I hoped would be a dreamless slumber. I slept deeply and awoke the next morning feeling sluggish. I emerged groggily from my blankets, opened my bleary eyes, and felt a gasp rise up my throat like rancid bile. Trailing across the bedroom floor, up the walls and along the ceiling before coming to a halt directly above my bed, was a path of wet shoe prints. I wish I could claim that I was brave. If I had been brave, if I had scrubbed away the shoe prints and attempted to do something, anything to protect my home from the gray-clad stranger, then perhaps my life would have turned out drastically different than the bleak existence I live today, and these words would have never been penned. The truth is that I packed whatever I could fit into my suitcase, bought a train ticket, and left that very morning. I never returned to the idyllic beach town that brought me so much happiness. My fear of the gray man was so incredible that it drove me to abandon my apartment and possessions, my hard-earned career, and the promising future I had worked so diligently to obtain. I went back to my hometown, a small city far away from any beach, and began to eke out a quiet living. I remain there to this day. I cannot help but wonder what my life would be like now if I hadn't gone for the fateful walk on the beach. Sometimes I lie awake in bed, unable to sleep and sickened with regret, and feel utterly consumed by bitterness. All these years later, I still don't understand who or what the old man was. For decades, I perpetually glanced over my shoulder, afraid that I'd catch sight of him in every dark corner. I left my house only when necessary, and eventually I began to never leave it at all. Most of my family is gone now, and the only people I ever see with any regularity are the ones who deliver my mail and the volunteers from a local charity group that leaves lukewarm meals on my doorstep. Painful, insurmountable loneliness continues to haunt me like a melancholic specter. But last night I looked outside and saw something standing inches away from my window, bathed in moonlight and staring back to meet my gaze. Something gray. I know the old man will be here soon, but I don't have 30 more years left in me to spend hiding, and I'm much too tired to run. It's funny. After living in fear for this moment for so very long, I find that I'm actually not afraid now. I'm ready to be at peace, to no longer be trapped inside the reclusive prison I have confined myself within. Whatever happens, I hope that tonight ends with me finding the same freeing tranquility I felt decades ago during that serene moment on a calm, quiet beach. I'd like to think I've earned it. My hands shook as I flipped through the journal to discover that the rest of the pages were blank. I didn't sleep that stormy night. Instead, I read the entry over and over again, captivated by the strange tale told within its lines, and even transcribed every word of it onto my laptop. In the morning, when the rain was finally over and the sky was blue once again, I grabbed the journal and drove back to the brick house. I hoped to find the woman there. I knew the questions I wanted to ask her would seem confusing and odd, or maybe even alarming, but it was the only way to quell my overpowering curiosity. I had to know what happened to her unfortunate Uncle Lawrence, and if the old man was responsible for his death. As I pulled into the house's secluded street, I saw that the yard sale had already been set up for another day of business. But when I approached the driveway, I noticed that everything looked wet. Rain had heavily saturated the cardboard boxes, rendering them soggy and limp, and all the clothing items appeared damp to the touch. I realized that nothing was put away after my departure. Everything from the soaked blankets to the rain-filled teacups had been left to the mercy of the weather. Just as I was about to reach the front door, I caught sight of something peering out of an upstairs window. Something that caused me to drop the journal as if it were on fire and run back to my car. Something that scared me so badly that I've been holed up inside my house for the past 3 days and haven't once dared to look outside for fear of what I'll see. Something that has forced me to do everything I can to stay awake, including writing this post because I'm afraid of what will come into my home if I fall asleep. Something that made me wish I'd never gone back to that house or read a single word written in the journal. Something gray. Tornadoes don't send off the alarms in my brain. For my whole life, I've lived in this secluded farm town where, for about 3 months of the year, tornado warnings are common. We may get some wind and rain, but most of the time funnel clouds soar right by our small dot on the map. The lack of consequences has jaded me to tornado warnings. I am vaguely aware of them, but mostly, I continue my life without paying much notice, and I certainly don't panic. My tendency to downplay the severity of potential weather threats led to the source of terror in my life recently. My storm cellar. When I moved into my house, the storm cellar was shown off as a feature. I didn't really see the appeal at the worst of tornado threats in my life. I'd hopped in a bathtub. My family never had any sort of storm cellar. I acted impressed when touring the house, marveling at the structure made of concrete and pushed into a mound in the ground of my backyard. A small structure with a tin roof was placed over it. In the months that followed moving in, I spent much more time concerned about unpacking my belongings and settling in than thinking about the storm cellar. Dusting out the cobwebs and adding some preparedness items gradually led to the bottom of my to-do list and quickly became something I never got to. Eventually, I wasn't even the least bit concerned about it. I guess I should have been. Years went by before I ever even thought of my storm cellar again. One night at the height of storm season, my dog woke me up crying. He could hear storms moving into neighboring towns, thunder rolling from miles away. I slipped his leash on and walked him to the backyard, hoping maybe a restroom break would help calm him down and fall back asleep. In my half-asleep stupor, I saw something dart across the side of my yard near the storm cellar. My dog let out a howl in that direction. I shined my phone flashlight across the yard. I couldn't see anything. My dog furiously sniffed the air as I examined the fence. Suddenly I heard the bang of the storm cellar door. I turned around to see it shaking and another shadow darting by. That's when it hit me. Raccoons. Our small town was notorious for its lack of animal control, resulting in obese raccoons that were always an annoyance. One must have run right over the door of the storm cellar. I let my dog finish his business and went back inside. My boyfriend sat on the couch, awakened by my opening the doors to go outside. I mentioned the raccoon in the yard. "That's unusual," he said, rubbing his eyes in sleepiness. "Because they usually go to the front yard, you know, for the trash cans. You ready to go back to bed?" As I returned to my bed, I thought of the rattle of the storm cellar and how big that raccoon would have to be to make that sound. If it wasn't a raccoon, then what was it? The panic that seized my heart wasn't something I wanted to deal with, so I didn't. I shoved the thought from my mind and went to sleep. Odd occurrences filled the months following, all too small to be really pronounced in my mind for more than a few hours. I lost track of some of my favorite shirts. Sometimes my snacks would go missing, but I chalked that up to my boyfriend. Several weeks later, on a busy day at work, I received a text from my boyfriend who was home on a day off. It read, "I love you. Hope you feel better. Didn't want to wake you. Ran to the grocery store. Don't panic if I'm not back when you wake up." I was confused. I wasn't feeling badly, and I was at work. Did he have another girlfriend that was meant for? I had time to read the text, but not to respond. As I was working, it replayed in my brain over and over. He had to be cheating because he was not talking to me. Maybe this girl had been eating my snacks and stealing my clothes, too. I was furious by the time I got home. I paced the kitchen as my boyfriend finally walked through the door with wrists full of grocery bags. He barely walked through the threshold before my words burst out of me. "What is this? Who were you talking to?" I held the phone up, pointing to the message he'd sent. "You? Who else?" he said, chuckling slightly as he unloaded groceries. "Mark, I was at work." I spat. And you came home because you were sick. Mr. Higgins sent you home because you couldn't stop vomiting." He sounded so casual that it infuriated me. "No, I was at work all day." I shouted. What kind of wild gaslighting was this? "Do I need to take you to the ER? Have you thrown up more since I left? I mean, if you are still sick and you're confused, we probably should go to the ER. Have you taken your temperature?" He said, moving to the cabinet to grab a thermometer. "Mark, stop it. I was at work all day. I didn't come home. You can cut the act and tell me who else you're seeing on the side." Mark sat down at the kitchen table and motioned for me to sit beside him. Something I'd always admired about him was his ability to be calm and rational while I tended to have explosive emotions. He placed his hand on mine and took a deep breath. Okay, I'm not sure what you think is happening, so let me walk you through the events of the day again. I think maybe you just slept too long and got mixed up. You left for work this morning. About 12 you came in and looked really pale. You said you couldn't stop throwing up at work and Mr. Huggins said you had to come home. You looked like you were going to blow right then. So I got you a cool rag and helped you into bed. We talked for a few minutes until you could fall asleep. I sent you that text so you wouldn't panic when you woke up and I wasn't here. You hadn't been sick in hours, so I thought you were okay. He said calmly, Mark, I didn't come home. I was at work. All day. Full shift. I tried to remove the emotion from my voice so he'd really hear me. You did come home. I know because I tucked you in. I spoke to you. My brain couldn't process. Either I was losing it or he was, and neither scenario was appealing. I'll call Mr. Higgins, I said, picking up the phone. He can tell you I was at work for the full shift and he didn't send me home. Okay, but if he says he did send you home, we're going to the ER. Maybe you're sick enough to be hallucinating, he said. He was so concerned that I couldn't even be angry at his suggestion that I was hallucinating. I put the phone on speaker as it rang. Mr. Higgins picked up, his gruff voice filling my kitchen. Hello? Hey, Mr. Higgins. Could you just confirm real quick that I worked all day today? Why? Just trying to prove a point. I worked my full shift today, right? Yeah, you did. I mean, you know that. You were here. Yep, thanks, Mr. Higgins. I clicked end and stared at Mark's dumbstruck face. You were here. I kissed your forehead. I talked to you. You were here, he said, tears beginning to form in his eyes. Fear struck me suddenly. Maybe something was wrong with him. Images of brain tumor scans and articles written by spouses of schizophrenic patients flooded my mind. Mark, maybe we should go to the hospital. I began gently. The hospital, so I can be committed? I know what I saw. You were here, he cried. His panic was quickly transferring to me. You know what? Let's just do things the Mark way. Calm down, take a little break. We will figure this out, I said, putting an arm around him and squeezing. I suggested he lay down while I take a little walk in the yard to collect my thoughts. I paced the backyard. My signature move when in crisis. It had to be a brain tumor. I'd seen things like this on TV. I just have to take Mark to the hospital. That's when I heard the door. I whipped around to see the storm cellar door rattle in broad daylight. There were no animals around. No wind kicked up. Just the door rattling inexplicably. I walked over to the storm cellar and stared at it. I think sometimes you know what you're about to do isn't a great idea. You know you're about to start something you won't have control over. You know if you say yes, if you click the right button, if you open the door, you're inviting in a storm of possibilities into your life. It's scary. It's a primal fear that seizes up your insides. That's what I felt when I pulled open the cellar door. It was dark down there. The small stairs that descended down to the concrete floor were dusted with cobwebs. I thought of spiders and snakes infiltrating the space in the time we'd left it stagnant. My heart was in my throat as I began down the stairs. As I hit the bottom of the staircase, I hit the light on the sidewall, hoping it was still functional. It flickered and illuminated the small concrete cell. As my eyes adjusted, I saw it. I saw me, sitting on the floor, cross-legged in my favorite shirt. It was me. Or someone who looked just like me. I felt bile rise in my throat as my mind flooded with anxiety. What was happening? Don't be scared. My own voice comforted me. She had my voice, my face, my body. I had no hope of forming a sentence. I know this is hard to understand. She began, still sitting in the middle of the floor. I had no hope of convincing my mind that this made any sort of sense. Do you "Do you live down here?" I asked, my voice coming out smaller than I'd intended. Fear dropped from each word. "I do, but one day I'll live up there." She pointed upwards to the ceiling of the cellar. "Where?" My voice came out. "In my house? Your house, you'd call it. But we both know it's mine." "I'll get what's mine," she said calmly. Her words chilled me to the bone. I'll call the cops." I could barely hear my own words. It was like she had an energy that was putting pressure on my whole body. It felt hard for me to breathe. "You won't," she said simply. I felt my legs begin to weaken and my chest get tighter. I was on my knees before I knew it, clutching at my chest, begging for air. She held a hand up and the feeling stopped. "You won't." I tried desperately to catch my breath as she spoke. "It may not be today, or this week, or even this year, but I'll stay down here, and I'll visit like I did today. I'll keep visiting. My visits will get more frequent. Then I will take your life, and you will take mine. You can fight if you want. You can tell Mark, but I control how I am seen. If I want to be you, I will. This process takes time. In the end, you'll go to my world, and I'll have a better life." She stopped speaking and walked to me. Crouching in front of me, she placed a hand that looked just like mine on my face. "You don't have a choice. You can try to make me leave. It won't work. This is your reality now," she whispered, never breaking eye contact. I blinked and woke up in my bed. I opened the door to the storm cellar, and no one was there. Mark was asleep beside me. I debated telling him, but finally decided to. We laid in bed as I told him about the person who looked just like me and threatened to steal my life. He said we can figure it out. He says we can take care of it. But honestly, it seemed like something was off about Mark. He wasn't quite concerned enough. I'm starting to wonder if that's really Mark. I wish I would have cleaned out my storm cellar. Coming home from work one evening, I noticed my wife on all fours in the hedges that lined our front porch. When I walked up to her, I realized she was kneeling beside the crack in the crawl space under the porch. She was cooing at the fence and holding a can of tuna in one hand. "There's a cat living under our house," she told me. "I heard it this morning and this afternoon. It keeps meowing." I didn't hear anything. I told her as much. "I heard him earlier," she insisted. "Before you came in from work, he was meowing." I bent down and shined my phone's flashlight into the narrow space. All I saw was a lot of dirt and cobwebs, but I couldn't quite get a good angle. I had to peek through the diamonds of the fencing to glimpse anything. It surprised me how well our shrubs limited the sunlight in such an open space. It was practically pitch black unless I shined a light. Though I couldn't see the cat, I didn't deny it was possible one crawled under our house. The lattice fencing that bordered our crawl space that had been cracked forever. My nephew came over and drove one of those battery-powered cars into it a few summers ago, and I'd never gotten around to fixing it. The bushes did a good job of covering the damage. My concern was that the thing under the porch might not be a cat at all, but a raccoon or some other pest. My wife stayed out for a bit longer, but the cat never came. She left the can of tuna just inside the crawl space in case the cat would come later. After work the next day, I pushed the fence forward to check on the tuna can. I found it empty right where my wife had left it. I still didn't hear anything, but I tried to take another look. I can't say if my crawl space was unusual. Spiders multiplied in abundance down there, and I think I could glimpse the dirty remnants of a rusty hammer that had been forgotten by the foundation a few years back. I've never been in my own crawl space, never checked it before this. But I heard my wife pull into the driveway, climb up our first 3 steps of the porch, stop, and climb back down. I thought she maybe went to check the can and would come right back up, but 15 minutes passed and she still didn't come inside. When I came out to check on her, she was there, between the bushes, trying to lure the cat out with kissing noises and little coos. When she saw me, she smiled. "Where do we keep the tools, honey?" she asked me. I vaguely recalled them coated in dust under the sink. Though I was a tomboy growing up, I was never very handy or interested in learning how to be, to my father's chagrin. But I had an idea of what my wife was going to propose, and I didn't like it. Instead of telling her, I asked, "Why? What if she's trapped in there?" she asked. "We could just cut through this little piece of fencing and then she could come back out." The dollar sign of the damages came to my head first. Right now, it was only a crack in the fence. Something that could be clamped closed and fixed with some glue if I ever got around to the hardware store. Carving a hole in the fence was a different, more expensive matter altogether. "No," I said. "If she got in, she can get out." "But no, look," she said as she pressed her hand against the crack. The wood groaned as it gave in, bending under the house. When my wife tried to pull it forward, the breakage along the wood locked in place. "It only goes one way." "Then prop it with a stick. We're not cutting a hole in the fence." My wife left another can of tuna out that day and slipped a blanket through the crack. The next day she came in with a box of proper cat food and a feeding dish. It became routine for her to leave out a full can in the evening and pick it up in the morning. "I saw her," she said a few days later. "But she's so skittish she went to hide in the blind spot behind the stairs. We should just cut a small square for her, just in the corner." I still didn't want to go to that extreme measure. We'd propped open the gap with some garden tools and the wood was bent to hang open at a slight angle because of it. But my wife said that wasn't enough space. Having still never seen or heard this cat, I wasn't too invested. I half suspected we had a raccoon living under us. We had a small fight over it, but I won in the end. The fencing would remain intact, but I felt bad about it the next day. I came home from work early and decided to fill the cat food for her and set it under the porch where she'd set it as a kind of peace offering. I laid the dish down at the entrance where my wife always set it and pressed my ear to the side of the fence, listening for movement. I heard nothing at first, but then I noticed a noise the way you might notice the sound of an air conditioner once it stops. I'd heard something breathing, not panting like a dog, but the steady inhale and exhale of something large. Stop. Then, there was a swipe of gray and the rapid shuffle of something scurrying under the house. It grabbed the dish and ran back into the dark. When I turned to look inside, there was a shadow of something large, hunched with a rounded back and round eyes that reflected in the dim light. I didn't scream. I didn't move at first, struck by the shock of seeing a person under my porch. I stared at him, and he stared back. My hands shook as I felt along my pockets for my phone before remembering I left it on the counter and sighed. Screw that, I thought. I bolted to my neighbor's house and asked to use her phone to call 911. A police car arrived at my neighbor's within a few minutes and I told the officer what I saw. When he went to check, he looked doubtful once I pointed out the narrow crack. When he flashed his light between the fencing, he was hampered by the bushes and the angle. From what he saw, the space looked empty. I told him my wife thought a cat had slipped in through the fencing. She'd heard this guy for weeks. The cop inspected the space and frowned. The separated plywood didn't create enough space for a petite woman like me to fit through, much less a full-grown man like what I reported. "Do you have any other access points?" he asked. "I don't think so." "Most crawl spaces have doors or maybe a window to get inside from the back. What about the basement?" "What about it?" "Most crawl spaces connect to the basement. I can see the concrete from here." It was about then that I realized that I hadn't been in the basement in years. This was our first house, and the last time I'd even glimpsed at the basement was when we first moved in. We didn't have enough stuff to need the storage, and we'd never gotten around to doing anything with the space. The cop did a scan, asking me to wait outside. About 10 minutes later, he came back out and said there was no one there, and no signs of squatting. He told me I could go back inside and to have a good evening. That was it. He'd given me the rubber stamp of approval and drove away, leaving me to face my house. He missed something. I was sure. Something was under my house. How well did he really search in 10 minutes? I can't even find my phone in 10 minutes. There could be a part of the basement he missed, or maybe the thing went to hide somewhere else in the house, or there were parts of the house I didn't know about. Another access point he missed. I stared at my home, taking it in like a stranger, noting the angle of the roof and counting the windows. So many windows. The one by the kitchen is jammed open. There's a hanging garden support that leads right up to the second story. The roof isn't steep. Anyone could walk on it comfortably. All it took was a scare, and the sturdy walls I used to take comfort in became a trap. Then I heard the meowing. It came from the crawl space. My chest tightened and I almost turned and ran back to my neighbor. Instead, I brought out my phone and started recording a video. I gingerly crouched down by the shrubs and the meowing kept on. Clearer this time. Like the cat was only a few feet away. I shone the light inside and, like every other time, there was nothing. I angled the camera, angled the light to the corner where I last saw it. The damn cat meowed again from the blind spot just behind the stairs. Then this funny idea came into my head. I had a camera. It could see for me. Why not stick my arm in a little further? Get the footage for the cop to actually do something. My hand was too big for the diamonds between the lattice fencing, so I'd have to use the gap, push it open, and stick my hand through. I was on my stomach about to press my whole shoulder against the gap to get a little more distance when I sobered to exactly how stupid I was being. I can't say if it was the stress or even if it was my idea. I just know that I would never have done that knowing something that big was in there. I gave up. Screw the cat. Lacking any idea of what to do next, I called my mother. She lived 2 towns over, but anything was better than sleeping in the house. I sat on the lawn and waited for my wife to come home. When she did, the damn thing started meowing again. I was on my feet the moment she pulled into the driveway. I tried to tell her not to park and that we were just going. But she climbed out, confused by my rushed word vomit of the situation. She looked over my shoulder and shrieked, "Honey, the cat! She..." She didn't finish. She dropped her bag and ran for the crawl space. I realized as she pushed past me, it was a cry of delight. My heart dropped and I ran to her, grabbing her arm and basically wrestling her away from the hedges. I tried to explain as I pulled, but for some reason, she didn't read my tone of voice, didn't hear the desperation. Didn't hear me screaming it wasn't a cat under the house. All she recognized was that I was pulling her by force. I was hurting her, and that gave her more reason to fight against me. She was stronger than me. I could even feel her gaining when she tried to pull away, and she'd win this struggle on sheer will. I let go, holding my arms up and waiting for things to quiet down. And here's where I know something was wrong with her. If the woman in front of me had been completely my wife, she would have chewed me through about how I'd grabbed her. Cat, long forgotten. Instead, she turned away and said, "I'm just gonna go see." She said it so pleasantly, as if she hadn't been screaming at the top of her lungs for me to let her go a second before. I tried to pull her again, but she slipped out of my grip. She practically ran into the fence. When she leaned against it, it was like she slipped through, like the tough wooden siding was rubber. I don't know how, but she made it through before I could touch her. I slammed into the fencing, hearing the wood groan but refused to splinter or give in. I reached in trying to grab her leg. My fingers brushed the back of her shoe against the ridges of her flats. She didn't kick me off, but she crawled away. I could hear her shuffling, hearing her singing in the shadows that made the afternoon seem pure black. And I heard the cat. I thought of that man hunched in the corner with glinting eyes, reaching its arms around my wife. I needed to stop it. I leaned back and kicked the fencing, trying to make it give just another inch, just a sliver for me to slip through. Something cracked. The fencing pushed back further on my next kick, and I had an opening. I scurried in there with no plan, no idea what I'd do. The moment I passed through the fencing, the dark nearly blinded me and a terrible chill ran from the cold dirt and the shadowy space ran through me. I pawed through blindly, calling her name, shaking so hard I couldn't even speak without stuttering. My eyes adjusted soon, allowing me to distinguish textures and shapes with what little light I had. I scanned for any sign of her, feeling like every breath, every failed second was another where I'd lose her forever. Then I heard my wife gasp. She giggled and there was a victorious little thrill in her voice. "There you are!" Her voice came from my left. I called her name and started crawling toward the blur large enough to be a person. I reached forward and I found it again, the rubber sole of her shoe. Just as I did, I looked up a fraction, and in the dim light, there was a glint of big, yellow eyes. There was a crunch, like a branch snapping in half. My wife made a sound I'd never heard before, not a foot in front of me. This was not the sort of scream that I'd heard when she found a spider in the bathroom, and not the one I'd heard when I proposed. It was animalistic and raw, and told me I'd failed. The rubber sole was yanked away, like her foot was tugged out of my hand. I fell forward into the dirt, and when I crawled forward, my hand slipped on the hot mud. I scrambled, trying to find her again, hand in front of me, pawing at the darkness until I hit the fencing on the other side. Then, the silence hit me, and I had the terrible thought that I might be alone. Shakily, I reached for my phone and turned on the flashlight. All around me was the crawl space I'd peered into before. Just a low ceiling beam covered in cobwebs, packed with dirt. Nothing to see except for the mud, gray, and almost textureless in the far light. But as I came closer, the color sinking into the dirt was red and thick. Blood on the ground, blood on my hands. I called my neighbor. I called the cops. I called my parents. I called everyone, and all from down in that crawl space. They had to drag me out and stop me from digging. I was brought to the police station to make a missing persons report at the end of the day. I was sent to a psychiatrist to discuss my delusions. Then I was brought to my mother's to spend a few weeks there. I wasn't arrested, though I was brought in for questioning a few times regarding my wife's disappearance. Then, after all that commotion, there was silence. Cops stopped coming around. My wife's missing poster weathered away, and I was expected to go back to that place like nothing happened. The thought of living there, knowing what lives under me, fills every inch of me with dread. It is there, and it took her just like that. I don't know what it is, and I stopped trying to explain it a long time ago. There was nothing left for discussion. I wanted to burn the place down, but I couldn't afford that. So, I needed to sell it. Since I felt unsafe, my father offered to come with me to help clear the place out and meet with the real estate agent. I didn't even want to go, but I knew I couldn't let anyone go in there who didn't know what I knew. So, the day came, and I went, and I didn't put the house up for sale, nor do I intend to. You see, the thing is, when we were first climbing up the steps, I could hear my wife crying. I can still hear her on occasion, humming, talking, going about her day. Sometimes if I sit on the porch and close my eyes, I can almost make out what she's saying. And it's still like she's right next to me, just a little muffled. She's clearer when I'm crouched by the fencing. My name is Scott, and I suffer from REM sleep behavior disorder. That's what the doctors tell me anyway. Basically, I act out my dreams during the REM cycle of sleep. which, if I am having a lucid dream, means everything I experience feels much more real. But that's the problem. I don't think it's just some disorder anymore. When I was younger, probably about 12 years old or so, my parents thought it was just me sleepwalking. We moved around a lot because of my dad's work as a construction manager, and I guess they figured it was the stress of moving so often that caused it. But when we finally settled down and didn't go away, my parents decided to seek professional help. I never saw a problem with it personally. It never really felt like I was sleeping. It was more like a meditation state. I was aware of my surroundings, but everything just felt a little off. I would see things that other people couldn't. Fantastical and terrifying creatures that loomed in the dark. But despite my reassurance that there was nothing wrong, I still had to see a somnologist. The building looked brand new. It was small and looked to be freshly painted white. It had a welcoming atmosphere as we walked in with a receptionist at a desk on the left. "Hello, how are you today?" she asked when she noticed us. My dad responded, "I'm doing well. We're here to see Dr. Caston for my son here." He patted me on the shoulder. They filled out some paperwork for me, and shortly after, I was called back to see him. "Welcome, Scott. My name is Dr. Caston. I'm glad to see you're looking well rested," Dr. Caston said as I walked into his office. "Hey, my name's Scott. I was never great with social interactions. Hello, Dr. Caston. Nice to meet you." He let out a short chuckle. "It's all right. Please have a seat." He gestured to the chair sitting across from his desk. "Now, I would like to ask you a few questions before we get started. I already talked to your parents, but I would like to get your version of everything as well. Before I prescribe you any medications, that is." He had that wise old man feel about him, but only looked to be in his 30s or so. "When did this all start?" he asked me when I finally sat down. "About maybe 2.5 years ago, I think. We finally settled down and my parents figured it was just sleepwalking or something," I said with a hint of nervousness. "Have you noticed a lessening of symptoms since you have settled down? Any new symptoms, perhaps?" he asked inquisitively. "No, not really. It just all feels real in the moment. I see things that don't quite make sense." "I didn't hear about this from your parents, but it isn't uncommon. In the case you are having lucid dreams, the added movements of this potential condition could make your dreams feel that much more real. You find yourself questioning reality?" He was asking this question in a weird direction, but he was the doctor. "Well, the dreams do feel real. Almost like I'm meditating, but with my eyes open." He wrote something down in a notepad. "What type of things do you see?" He seemed to be very interested. "Ghosts, creatures that I can't find anywhere online, impossible entities I can't describe." He jotted something else down. "Well, from what I have gathered from you and your parents, I believe this should be a rather simple fix. I'm going to prescribe you melatonin at a strength of 10 mg. This is typically only meant for adults, but based on the severity of your case, I believe it will do you well and won't be harmful. Talk to your parents if symptoms worsen, or if nothing changes. Have a good day, Scott." He wrote something down on a sheet of paper and called my parents in as I walked out the door. The medicine only really seemed to affect my movement. I wouldn't sleepwalk anymore. However, that just meant the things I was seeing would come closer to me. They never touched me or anything, so I figured that was the best solution. That was, of course, until recently. I never stopped seeing those things. In fact, as I grew older, I could see them more often. They also drew closer every night. It wasn't significant enough to notice at first, but eventually, they began touching my arms and legs in my sleep. The feeling of their hands was surreal, like something that was never meant to be felt, as if the cosmos itself turned into a living organism. Since it started, I had been waking up more exhausted. I have felt there had to be a correlation, so I did the only thing I could think of. I decided to go see a somnologist. It wasn't the same one, but I had been seeing this one for the past few years. The building was a bit larger than the one I went to as a child. It was painted brown and had a much more open lounge room with comfortable brown leather chairs. "Scott?" I heard the receptionist say. "You're back earlier than expected. I hope everything is going well." I think she noticed my bags, but didn't want to say anything. "I feel like $1,000,000. I responded drowsily. "Is Dr. Kent ready to see me?" "Yeah, you know where to go," she said before going back to something on her computer. "Hey, it's me." I tried to sound as cheerful as possible to mask the exhaustion. "Scott, please take a seat." He generally had a cheerful exposition, but he sounded a bit more serious today. "I see you've been having trouble sleeping." He gestured to my face, which I took as him pointing out the bags. "Yeah, well, I'm not quite sure how to describe what's been going on. Generally, my sleep is like sleep paralysis. You know how it goes. But lately, the figures have been touching my arms and legs, sometimes rubbing just over my heart as well. I know it's just a dream, but the feeling is so real." "Please elaborate." He sounded more serious. I couldn't tell if he thought I was crazy, or if he was just trying to figure out what was happening. Well, maybe not real, so much as it does unreal. Like, the feeling feels real, but the sensation is indescribable. Also, I pulled up my long sleeve shirt. In my dream, one of them scraped a fingernail up my forearm, but I can see it. I got closer to show him. "Have you gotten any animals as of late?" he asked. "No, just my goldfish." There was a pause. "Doc, I'm not saying I think they're real, but is there any reason this could happen? Maybe a reaction to my meds? Anything?" "No, not the reaction to the meds. Though it may be that you're building a tolerance to them so you're able to move in your sleep again. Then your brain is coming up with reasons for the sensations you're feeling in your sleep. I can up your dosage if you believe that will help, but you're already pushing it with how much you're currently taking." "Sure, it might, I guess." I wasn't really sure of my response, but I had to try something. As night approached and I got ready for bed, I took what he ended up recommending, which was basically just under what would cause me permanent brain damage. As I slept, I saw them again. There was more than I had ever seen, all poking and prodding at me. At one point, one of the things that appeared to be an old woman grabbed my arm and began moving my fingers like she was inspecting them. The whole night my adrenaline was pumping and I felt exhausted. My anxiety peaked when one of them that I can't describe stuck their hand into my arm and I lost all feeling in it until I woke up. I was drained physically, as well as something else that I can't quite explain. Spiritually. I decided to do some research to see if anyone else had any similar experiences. Considering my arm was still a little numb, I wanted to get any and all answers I could. It eventually led me to some forums about paranormal experiences, typically in a dreamlike state. Someone's retelling of their recurring sleep paralysis episodes that eventually started affecting them in real life had a lot of attention. Things like scratches that they could have caused on their own, as well as some unexplainable bruises. Some people were talking about their personal experiences. One in particular caught my eye. "Yeah, I have similar experiences. My doctor prescribed me some medication, but it just made them worse." The comment was a few months old, but I decided to try and get in contact with them. I first tried just replying to the comment, but after a few hours, I decided I should take more direct measures. I found their email through some questionable means and sent them one. It mostly was just a few questions about if they had found a way to deal with the dreams, and if they found a solution through therapy or anything like that. It was about 8 hours later or so, just as I was getting ready for bed when I got a response, but it wasn't one I was expecting. Someone had responded to my comment. "Hey, just thought you might want to know. I did some digging and apparently this guy was sent to a mental institution recently. A few days ago, he was found dead. They labeled it as a heart attack in his sleep or something. Hope you figure out whatever you need to, my guy." That was it. Just some stranger telling me the guy died. Sure, it was sad, but it wasn't helpful at all. That's what I thought at first anyway, but the longer I dwelled on it, the more everything made sense to me. He was on medication for some sort of sleep disorder because of whatever he saw in his sleep. He was eventually sent to a mental institution, then died in his sleep by heart attack. Whatever the guy had, it must have been similar to what I've got. The scratches and bruises, weird visions in his sleep. I began to worry that I may have something similar happening to me. I responded to the stranger. Hey, do you know anyone I might be able to talk to? What he's talking about feels awfully familiar and I could use some help. Unfortunately, they never responded. So, instead of taking my usual medications, I decided to do something I hadn't since I was a child. Or rather, I decided to not do something. I didn't take any medication. It took a little while to fall asleep, but eventually it came to me. The things were much more handsy. They were holding my entire body down while others gathered around me. I couldn't move no matter what I tried. The sensation of their hands going into different limbs prevented any movement whatsoever. It was an agonizingly long dream, though I don't know if that's what I would call it. All of their poking and prodding from that night was easily visible in the morning. There were even a few bloodstains I noticed as I stumbled out of bed. The numbness was unrelenting, so I called in sick for work. I had to get everything situated. I couldn't go to sleep if I wanted to keep whatever was happening from happening. I continued to do some research and found a few pages that claimed things like keeping a crystal beside you as you slept, typically some form of quartz, or burning sage in the house would keep spirits away. While I'm not certain that's what they were, I wanted to see if I could potentially do anything that could stop these things from touching me. So I went to a pawn shop that I knew I had seen some quartz at and bought some. Next, I went to a gardening shop and picked up some sage. A big bundle of it. Of course, I also picked up some salt from another store. It may just be a bunch of hogwash, but I wanted to take every possible precaution. So I had to pick up some salt. That night, I was ready. I had a necklace with a cross, a piece of quartz to hold in my hand as I slept. I burned an entire bundle of sage and left a little burning in an ashtray near my bed, and I had made a salt circle where I could around my bed. I thought I was prepared, that nothing could even get near me, that they wouldn't be able to touch me again. That's what I thought, but boy was I wrong. For the first few hours or so, they did actually keep their distance. I was able to sit up on account of the fact that I had not taken any of my meds in the past 2 days, but I didn't dare move out of the salt circle. I couldn't actually tell what was holding them back, but if it was the salt, I didn't want to take any chances. So I just sat there, turning my head to look at all the figures standing around me, but by count, it was probably around 15. But I couldn't be certain. They were all just standing just out of reach of my bed. That wasn't until one of them that I could feel the power of began to walk to the front of the group. Somehow, I could tell that it was stronger than the rest, as if it could subconsciously sense an aura and my brain was telling me run away. A weak barrier like this cannot hold me back. It was the first time I had heard one of them speak. Its voice was deep and gravelly, with no noticeable accent, like a war vet who had seen their fair share of death and smoked a pack a day to deal with it. If you simply give your body to me, everything will be over with. You will not have to deal with any of us anymore. Just then, it grabbed my heart. The pain was immeasurable, like talons stabbing straight into my heart. 1, 2, 3. My heart was still beating, but much slower than normal. Just give in and your body will not have to die, boy. It sounded nervous. Like it wasn't sure if it was doing it was right. 1, 2, 3. Still beating. Why? It was all I could manage to get out. The reasoning is beyond you, boy. Now give it up. He screamed that last part in desperation. I suddenly remembered the crystal that I had been holding in my hand and stabbed the thing in the arm with it. What happened appeared to be the crystal absorbing some sort of energy from the thing's arm. It jolted its arm back and suddenly dissipated into nothingness without saying a word. The other things followed its lead, leaving me in a blank room. Something I hadn't seen in my dreams in so long. When I awoke, I had a slight pain where my heart was, but aside from some mild irritation, it appeared to be fine. I scheduled an appointment for an MRI and went into work. Everything was fine and I rarely see any creatures in my dreams anymore. But from time to time, sometimes in my dreams, sometimes in day-to-day life, I occasionally catch a glimpse of that thing out of the corner of my eye. But no matter how much I try to focus on it, I can never get a good look. I'm glad I taught my dog to speak. And yes, you heard that right. But it's not what you think. My dog Trace uses buttons to talk. When you press a button, a sound cue plays and different buttons make different words. I got the idea after seeing videos of another dog, and even cat owners being able to pull it off with simple words like outside or food. My dog is somewhat fluent, and she sometimes strikes up a very short conversation with me. It's been around a month when she used her first button, and she's drastically improved since then. Obviously, I can't restrain her to a 10-word vocabulary, so I've added more buttons and taught her the meaning of them. My story starts sometime during yesterday. I was sitting on the couch watching Netflix. My dog sat beside me, and she goes to the kitchen where the buttons are. Outside, play. I stand up with a sigh, walk to the back door, and get the moldy ball off the counter next to the window and play fetch. After a half hour of throwing the ball around, she eventually goes back inside and I follow along too. Close the back door and get back to binge watching. I make myself some coffee, give my dog a mountain's worth of affection, and just have a good time chilling at home. Dog goes to sleep after a while in her own room. All good. When she frantically runs downstairs, almost barking herself to death and pressing buttons like mad. Help outside. Outside. Look. I'm obviously shaken by this and ask with the buttons, "What's wrong, Outside. Look. Help." I'm confused by this, so I go and look out of every window. Nothing. Trace is still pressing the goddamn buttons and barking. At this point, I'm fed up, but I know for sure something's wrong. Because it's a dog, and you never ignore a dog. So I walk around the entire house doing a full 360 degrees. Nothing. Nada. So I tell her with the buttons, no outside. Trace finally settles down and goes up to her bed, albeit reluctantly, and curls up. When I hear a bark again, but this one wasn't from inside. It's in the garden. I stand up and run to the back door, confused, and it's my dog. It's everything Trace is, but not. That's not my dog, but it is. But how? She's asleep upstairs. So who is that? Trace looks at me unblinkingly through the glass. She presses the inside button on the steps. Again and again. Should I let her in? I better check if it's actually my dog. So I run upstairs into my bedroom and lo and behold, Trace is soundly sleeping in her bed. I rush back down and the mystery dog is gone. I look behind me to find it again with that same glare, just standing there expectantly. How did it get inside? The dog span around before going to the couch as if nothing had happened. I press the buttons on the mat. Stay, couch, as I rush back upstairs to grab my real dog and lock the bedroom door. When I hear scratching noises on it, my dog and the other ones start barking. On the other side of the door, the barking stops for a while when I hear the buttons go off. Inside. And I hear buttons that I've never recorded. Come here. Love me. Let in. As of right now, I'm still in my bedroom with the door locked. The dog seems to have disappeared, but I don't know for sure. I have a phone charger and my dog. And that's about it. The thunder outside my third-hour class was soothing. It was close to spring break, so we were just watching a Disney or Pixar movie. I can't remember which company made it. It was Wall-E. Nobody was paying attention, either sleeping or on their phones. Hell, even the teacher was on his phone. The rain began coming down harder. I was seated by the window, and all I was doing was watching the rain. April storms like this were common where I live, so it was nothing out of the ordinary. The bell rang to let us out of third hour and go to lunch. In my school, you can go outside during lunch period, and you don't have to eat. It can be cool when you just aren't hungry. Of course, like usual, there were some of those kids, you know the ones, that thought it would be funny to go outside and get soaked. I checked my phone while eating, so I didn't notice that they hadn't come back all lunch period. I got a weather alert on my phone that we were under a tornado watch. Looking outside, it seemed about right. When the bell rang, I tossed my tray and headed to PE. The kids who had gone outside were supposed to be in that class. However, when the teacher did roll call, all 3 that had gone outside were absent. A couple of us were confused because we had just seen them. One kid spoke up to say that she'd seen them go outside during lunch. The teacher sighed and pressed a button to talk to the office. Hello? The voice rang over the speaker. Yeah, are Ethan, Luke, and Nate inside? My students said they were here just a couple minutes ago. There was a silence over the intercom. We all stood around awkwardly, wondering when we were going to play Capture the Flag. The voice came back over the intercom again after a couple seconds. And you said they're not with you? No, they're not here. We heard the intercom hang up after that. The teacher assumed that the kids were running around in the halls and that the office staff had to try and find them. We started Capture the Flag, and it usually only takes 2 rounds of the game before the bell rings and we have to go. However, the bell didn't ring. We ended up playing a 3rd round before we realized something was wrong. Our attention snapped to the clock, which was 13 minutes after the class was supposed to end. Just as we were preparing to leave, the intercom rang out. Attention teachers, keep your students in your class until further notice. My stomach sank. I was always a nervous kid. This made me nervous like many other things do. The teacher looked confused for a second before switching the game to Martian tag. We played for a while before getting tired. He conceded and put on a movie for us to watch. Space Jam. A couple minutes in, and we heard a blood-freezing shriek from outside the classroom. The teacher naturally got up to investigate, and all of us were staring at the door in fear, wondering what could have made that noise. A kid I didn't know too well, Kai, snuck over to the door to look out the small window. He stared for a couple of seconds before pushing the door open and leaving. I had no idea what to do, but after 3 other students did the same, I freaked out. Everyone in the room was starting to wonder what was happening, so we made our way to the door. All 14 of us left, and we peeked out the window. It was just the empty hallway. It was still raining outside, and it was getting unnaturally loud. Well, I'm going home, a kid said before pushing us out of the way and leaving the gym. I wanted to get out of there at that point too. Slowly, everyone filled out of the gym and went off in different directions. All I had on me was my phone, but that was the only important thing I brought to school. I decided to just head straight for the exit, as did one other person, Max. He was annoying, but in a way that it makes everyone happier. It's hard to explain. We didn't talk much as we rushed for the front exit. When we did make it, the office next to it was abandoned. Nobody was in sight and the lights were off. We looked outside into the rain, and we weren't able to see anything at all. It was raining way too hard. I decided to wait until the rain slowed down before I left. However, Max did not share this same line of thought. He opened the door and walked into the rain. I checked my phone, and like you'd expect, there was no service. I put it back into my pocket because I don't have the password to my school Wi-Fi. I didn't have any idea what to do while waiting for the rain to stop, so I wandered the hall. When I got into the area that had the 6th grade classes, I saw someone dart into a room, faster than I could believe. You know how your vision clouds when you see something extremely startling? I hesitated in the hall, wondering if it was just a scared kid or what. I slowly made my way over to the door that it went into. Like many classroom doors, it had the tall and narrow window with wires in it. I peeked into the window and saw a student crouched in a corner sobbing. I slowly opened the door and he immediately looked to the door. The fear on his face is still burned into my memory. He ran over to me and hugged me. Based on his size, I'd assume he was in 6th grade. After less than a second, he let go of me, realizing what he had done. I'm sorry, it's just that I don't know where anybody else is. There's something scary in the halls, he said through tears, sniffling every couple of seconds. I felt sorrow while looking at him. I decided that I'd make sure he gets out alive as well. Listen to me. We're going to get out of this, all right? I'll protect you until the storm is over. He calmed down a bit and nodded. I looked around outside of the classroom, wondering what he meant by something scary. I thought maybe it was what made that horrible shriek earlier. I let him out of the classroom and I wandered the halls once again. The silence was deafening. I started to panic, wondering what happened to the rest of the students. As I rounded a corner, I saw what I'm sure the kid was referring to when he mentioned something scary. I quickly ducked back, holding my breath. The kid, who had told me his real name was Junior, was hiding behind me. I heard the footsteps of whatever it was that was in the hall. It was opening doors and looking inside. I was in the 7th grade hall at the moment. As it opened a door, I heard someone scream. Then that hideous shriek that the monster made. I had ducked behind the corner too fast to have gotten a good look at it. The scream coming from the poor person in that room was quickly silenced, after which the scream was replaced with the sound of meaty crunching. The hallway I was in had a window to the outside. The rain had definitely slowed down, but I wasn't going to risk what was in the rain. I went back the other way. I forgot to mention, but at this point the power in the school was off, and the light inside was dim in well-windowed areas. If there weren't windows, then it was pitch black. I rounded another corner and found myself staring down a black hallway. Under any other circumstances, I would have avoided it, but I heard the monster a ways back and it was getting closer. I slowly made my way down the hallway. I grabbed the hand of Junior as to not lose where he was. I managed to find the unlocked door, and I made my way in to try and hide from the monster. When I entered, I felt a book slam into my head. Ow, what the hell? I couldn't see anything in the room, and when I responded, I heard someone gasp in the darkness. They profusely apologized. I had a headache from it. I reached over to the doorknob to try and find a way to lock it. Luckily, there was a small lock that prevented the doorknob from being turned. I was sure that the monster heard me yell. My suspicions were confirmed when it slammed against the door, eliciting a scream from Junior. The monster tried the doorknob, but when it didn't open, it started to get violent. It was trying to break down the door. At this point, I accepted my inevitable death. Then an idea popped into my head. Some of the classrooms have a closet that lead into another classroom. I didn't want to turn on my flashlight so that monster didn't know where we were going. I asked the kid if there was a closet in this room, to which I got no reply. There must be, I thought, because I realized that the kid was no longer in here. I stumbled around in the darkness, shaking from fear. I had to keep going, though, for Junior at the very least. I managed to find the closet and I slipped in. I made my way to the next classroom as the door from the previous one was destroyed. I heard it shatter. I realized my mistake, and I rushed over to the window in the classroom. I had no choice but to brave what was out in the rain. I tossed a book at the window, hoping to break it, but it hopelessly bounced off. I made a rash decision, and I tried my hardest to punch out the window. It cracked. I tossed another punch, pushing through the pane, and the window broke. The glass deeply lacerated my hand. I hopped out, cutting my legs. As I turned around to grab Junior, the monster broke its way into the room. Junior reached out to me, but the monster was faster. I got a good look at it as it dragged Junior away. It was a large mass of flesh, eyes, mouths, and hair. I grabbed Junior and left the room. I went numb. The screams that Junior let out as it took him haunt my dreams to this day. I tried to figure out where I was outside as the rain slowed to a drizzle. I was in the parking lot where it had to be a dozen police cars and ambulance were waiting. EMTs ran over to me when they saw me. From that point to the hospital is a blur. My parents, police, government agents. I got asked questions from everybody that knew about what happened. In the end, I got no answers. All I knew was that 112 people were missing. I never knew what came of that monster, or what happened to the people who disappeared in the rain. I left the town soon after, and I live in southern Indiana. That was 4 years ago. I recently graduated high school, and I tried to find out if the event was recorded online in some way or another. I couldn't find anything about it. No obituaries, no nothing. Anytime it rains now, I always get scared. My only hope is that whatever the monster was, it didn't escape. There's no doubt that death is a rather taboo discussion, but it remains a part of life that everyone at some point will come to terms with, or even acknowledge its creeping existence. There is somehow beauty in the macabre, and the unknown topic of death. There are plenty of examples of our human history that people explored this topic and found that there are positive messages one can understand and proclaim when reminiscing or discussing his own mortality. From the ancient Roman Stoics to the Eastern Asian Taoists and Sikhs, and even more modern Western philosophies such as nihilism and existentialism, one can find peace in the concept of remembering our mortality. As Seneca the Younger said in his writings about on the shortness of life, you want to live, but do you know how to live? You are scared of death, and tell me, is the kind of life you lead truly different from being dead? I am writing because of a rather awakening that I had a couple of days back. I am rather lazy as a person and oftentimes also quite irresponsible and even, dare I say, unreliable. The reason why I mention these characteristics of mine is because the past events that I will describe to you play a huge role on affecting these characteristics. As I said, I'm a rather lazy person. Also quite laid back to the point that I dismiss a lot of things happening around me. I awoke every day as if I have all the time in the world in my hands. I would spend hours on the internet, procrastinate and even waste my time on heated and rather pointless discussions on either Reddit or Facebook. I am not doing my best at even maintaining a healthy life. I had come to the conclusion that this is probably due to various factors that were infiltrated my life for the past 2 years. I feel that I am being controlled by my personal emotions, and even worse, my insecurities that keep surfacing for the past years or so, slowly making their way into my consciousness. However, as I said, the last week's event, somehow helped me remember where I am in this life. It was Friday. I came from a coffee shop to my university's dormitory and was greeted by a rather strange find. Outside my dorm apartment, neatly placed facing the door, was a small black envelope with a golden wax seal. Now, to clarify, I rarely get any mail, and if I ever have any, it will be under two circumstances. First, a dormitory or university envelopes who are often white and have the logo of the university. And second, by a mistake, as oftentimes my apartment number is being mistaken for another. There was something queer about this envelope, however. It was rather luxurious in appearance, as if someone was inviting you to some form of cocktail party, or a dinner serving at a 5-star restaurant. Such envelopes really felt out of place for a student dormitory, but I cannot judge since perhaps someone in this building might have ties to certain elites of society. There was no name on the receipt nor the sender on this envelope, and the only thing that was written was the phrase that was pressed on the golden wax. Memento mori. Is that Latin? Thought to myself, what a strange phrase. However, somehow I could not shake the feeling that I had seen it before. Furthermore, the wax seal had portrayed a single phoenix-like bird encompassing an hourglass. What an odd design this is. But it was marvelous to look at. The black paper of the envelope had a slight shimmer to it, as if it was the night sky with its infinite stars blinking and reminding us of their existence. Nonetheless, despite my profound admiration and curiosity, I was not able to open it, as I did not dare to tear such craftsmanship just because of the pure thought that I could not come with the terms that this was addressed to me. Therefore, I took it with care and gave it to the dormitory receptionist, claiming that it was probably again another mistake regarding mails being sent to my apartment. A couple of hours later, there was a knock on my door. To my surprise, it was the receptionist whom I gave the letter to. When I opened the door, she stood there and had a rather strange expression carved on her face. She started with apologizing and then giving me her condolences, while giving me the black, now opened envelope. She said the tenant that I initially assumed this mail was for opened it and contacted us that the letter inside addressed me personally. I was baffled and confused beyond any recognition. First of all, this is the first time I ever saw her acting in such a soft and warm-hearted way, and even more to provide me with an apology. I took the envelope, thanked her, and closed the door afterwards, leaving me and my confusion alone. I cannot deny that I did not feel more than confusion. There was this emotion of dread and anxiety that began building up regarding what I would learn from this damn envelope. So many questions raced through my mind. Did someone I know die? And if so, why didn't anyone call instead? Was this some joke or indeed perhaps a mistake, someone with a similar name and address? I don't know. My fingers touched the ivory paper that protruded from the torn top of the black envelope, and I felt the overwhelming emotions conquer my mind, causing my hand to eventually tremble. Alas, I took out the paper, and to my surprise, my first thoughts about this being some form of invitation came true. However, no luxurious party or fancy dinner was at stake, but rather concerned the purest macabre events of one's existence. An invitation to a funeral. The message read as follows. Dear Ivan Dimitrov, it is our deepest condolences that we request your honorary presence for the funeral service of our deepest and long-forgotten friend on the 10th of April 2021. You are also invited to the afternoon reception on the same date that will be held at 3 p.m. where the deceased's favorite meal will be served as an honor to his last request. The funeral service will take place at 12 p.m. at the St. Nicholas Cemetery outside the city's district. And the reception will be held at the deceased's house, in which you will be informed of its location after the funeral service. Don't behave as if you are destined to live forever. Death hangs over you. Will you live? And will you still? It's in your power. Be good now. Marcus Aurelius. I cannot express how perplexed I felt on that moment I had finished reading this invitation. There was no doubt that it was intended for me, as the chances of someone in this dormitory having the same name as me were rather slim. I say this with slight confidence since the receptionist came and told me that this was indeed for me, meaning there wasn't anyone on this floor or even building with the same name and surname as me. Furthermore, the whole incident, where the envelope was placed at my door, does not indicate any form of simple coincidence. The afternoon had progressed as my mind was occupied with this rather odd incident. My thoughts on this being some form of impractical joke were soon amplified when I've made some calls to my parents regarding this invitation. They both were confused and at first worried, and since the letter does not provide any name of the deceased, they dismissed it as some form of joke or perhaps some form of shady business. I was being warned not to go to the intentional place and just dismiss it. My father elaborated further, stating that if this was indeed a funeral invitation of someone we knew, it would not be in such luxurious style, but rather a simple phone call. Oh, how I wish I could dismiss it, and go on with their warnings. But my curiosity grew stronger with every passing minute. After I hung up the phone, I decided I will go to the funeral and humor the person behind it. Plus, the whole deal takes place in the day, which to me was rather strange for this being some form of shady business. But one could not be certain, so on that day I would inform my best friend on the matter, and then proceed with visiting the place. If something ill were to happen, at least someone would know. This was my first funeral, and for some reason, I was excited for it. The whole mystery surrounding its deceased, and of course the invitation, was surreal to me, and I looked forward to it. With every day coming near Saturday, I was growing more and more anxious and slightly ecstatic. Looking back now as of writing this, I can see how my naivety did cloud my better judgment on the matter. I did not care about the dangers, nor who was being buried. All I did care about was knowing the purpose of it all, and to somehow prove to myself that I was right and it was some form of joke. It is here that I must exclaim an observation I noticed on that particular Saturday morning. All week prior to the funeral service, I was ecstatic. Every day I lived it with pure productivity and joy. I wanted the week to be over with so I could finally go to this funeral and reveal its mystery. But now as I stare down at myself in the mirror, I catch glimpses of someone who does not wish to see death at this early stage in his life. That morning was gloomy. My every motion was slowed as if I was mourning and grieving for the loss of someone I didn't even know. I drank my black coffee and got dressed properly, wore my blackest outfit, and awaited the time to pass for me to leave. I spoke to no one besides my friend, which I said earlier I let him know where I was heading that day. Other than that, nothing seemed to matter to me. With slow movements and barely any haste, I moved down the stairs towards the parking lot where my car was parked. On my way, I saw the receptionist who gave me the envelope. As we exchanged glances, I saw her expression change from a borderline boredom to a rather sympathetic and concerning emotion. "Off to the funeral?" she said with a slight warmth in her voice, in which I responded with a simple, positive nod of my head. "All right. I'm deeply sorry for your loss, even though I do not know who it is that is being buried. It's always heart-wrenching to watch loved ones pass away, but at least they are in a better place." I sighed and agreed with her statement and thanked her for her kind words, even though deep inside I felt as if this whole deal was somehow false. I didn't know who was dying, and I felt as if I was somehow lying to her sincere expressions. Here she was for once giving her loving and sincere thoughts on a matter that I felt was just plain deceit. I truly hated myself at that moment. I felt embarrassed as if I was lying to someone who was giving me her heartwarming words, and there was me simply playing a role of a fool going on a perhaps fake funeral. Driving to the place of this dark event was even more overwhelming, with every passing traffic light and sharp turns making my destination less far ahead was causing emotions of fear, regret, and slight dread to creep in my mind. The road towards the cemetery was causing these emotions to manifest further, as the road leading there was old and neglected. Corroded asphalt caused the road to have bumps and holes, causing my vehicle to jump up and down like some sort of bumpy car ride. But after a while, ahead of me I saw the old cemetery, and with it a bone-chilling sensation had run down my spine. From afar, silhouettes of people dressed in black could be seen roaming outside the cemetery gates, like a group of ravens encircling a decaying body amidst a forgotten desert. I say this because the cemetery was located in a rather outskirt part of town. The area is rather deserted and open. Dead or dried vegetation can be seen surrounding the place. The only alive thing here were the participants and me. Outside the gates a hearse was seen, and people gathered to help some of the men to carry the coffin inside the cemetery. I was baffled since I did not expect at all a funeral to be held. My thoughts of this being some form of a prank were instantly disintegrated before me. I was left with the creeping feeling of dread and anxiety. I was nothing at that moment but a pure observer, watching the few people who were gathered slowly make their way along with the coffin inside the cemetery. They walked as if they were a parade of macabre, synchronizing their march with their heads bowed, showing their sincere grief and mourn. I eventually came out of the car and made my way towards the gates of the cemetery, willingly to follow the crowd as well. I did feel rather out of place, as I did not deserve to be here. I did not know whom I was mourning for, and with that I distanced myself from the crowd. When entering the cemetery, the cold scent of decay and death was well present. However, the ever so slight spring breeze brought with its fragrances of the nearby flowers, which in turn overpowered the gloomy monotony of this graveyard. Ahead of me the crowd marched in slow but rhythmic pace. However, with their backs turned, I could barely get any glimpse of their faces. The deeper we walked into the cemetery, the more silent it had become. The marching feet of the crowd on the dirt path, along with their faint murmurs, had come to abrupt end, causing the sounds of nature to take over. The whistling wind was gliding through the dried branches of the nearby trees, and the ever so slight calls of ravens could be heard nearby, whilst the crowd ahead of me remained silent and motionless. I could not see what was going on, and to be honest, I didn't dare at that moment, for to them, as far as I was concerned, my presence was unknown. Then the silence was eventually broken. The crowd before me had split into two lines. With their backs still turned to me, they formed a path as if someone was awaited to cross. With haste, I turned around to see if there was anyone behind me that was expected to pass through the crowd, and to my surprise, there was not a single soul. I swallowed, and with slow movements, I turned around to face the crowd once more, only to see them in the very same position. Were they expecting me to go through it? I thought to myself, and perhaps it is the case. As in the letter was stated, I was honored by this invitation. Now, most people most likely will state, why did I even choose to come here in the first place? And why I didn't just bolt straight out of this damn situation? But simply put, I couldn't. I felt obligated to be here, and part of me did not want to leave. I wanted to learn more, and I wanted to learn who in the hell was being buried today. And with that in mind, I pushed myself to walk on the path carved before me by the crowd, and it is here where things became even more terrifying. My walk was slow. I felt the constant feel of being watched and judged. I kept my head mostly bowed, and I did not dare to look on their faces, as I felt ashamed to be even here. I did not feel as if I knew this person, but somehow I also felt contempt to learn about him or her. I was halfway through the path, and I could very well see three rather strange figures looking downwards at the grave pit, the middle one being the tallest, presumably the priest, and his hands placed near his crotch in a respectful manner while holding a black book. I could not see his face. It was rather obscured by a black hat that he wore. To his right and left, there was a woman and a man respectively, dressed in their funeral attire, but the odd thing was the peculiar white veil that ever so slightly danced among the breeze, hiding their faces. I eventually passed the crowd, and before me stood the grave pit, and in which I saw the thing that horrified me that day. A man was placed with his hand clutched to his chest like a vampire, and amidst them was placed a small book that I could not see its title, but his face was the one that terrified me the most. It was my face. The very same one on a mirror or in a picture. I was the one being buried. My skin was pale and my eyes were closed, and my brown hair was well groomed and kept. I fumbled and fell backwards, and with terror I crawled away from the pit. I tried to scream, but I couldn't. There was nothing that could escape my throat. The three figures finally broke their gaze from the grave and stared at me as if I somehow disturbed their ceremony. With fear I began looking around me, and I saw the mourning participants of this funeral towering above me. White veils were pressed by the wind on their faces, reminding me of some grotesque recreation of the statue of the Veiled Virgin. It was alive and terrifying to witness. The wind had picked up their murmurs and whispers and amplified them, causing the whole scene to be surreal. The caw of ravens, along with the dried branches rustling like crazy. The faint murmurs and whispers were carried out among the gravestones as if the dead were speaking to me. I tried to cover my ears while I ran towards the gate, but I could still hear them in my head. There were many phrases, many words that were spoken, but these were the ones that I remember. Memento mori. Ivan, remember your death. Live a life that is worth dying for. I do not remember much afterwards, since as soon as I left the iron gate, my memory fragments seemed to be rather clouded. I remember some vague scenes, such as me driving and watching the crowd gather at the gates and waving at me, and then some other scenes of me driving and entering my apartment. What I do remember, however, are the phrases that were spoken to me, and I realized their meaning. To live is simple. We are all living our daily lives as if we are invisible to death, and when we are reminded of it, perhaps we start to see things differently. I do not know if this was some form of death call or near-death experience, but what I do know is that I've been living my whole life wrong, and I am willing to change. There are things we should not take for granted, like time and life, for they are rather precious. For as simple as they were given to us, they can equally be taken. Recently, my mother let my brothers and I in on an old family story from her side. She says the story has been passed down from a couple of generations, and that no one yet has been able to contest its accuracy. She told us the story with some reluctance, especially around my two younger brothers who are 14 and 16. I will call them Owen and Howie, respectively, for this story. She knew that the story was haunting enough to keep even a 14-year-old from sleeping. I'm 18 and female, and it had my skin crawling. She told us this story during our recent camping trip. We had reserved a small spot in a secluded campground near a lake for spring break. On our second night there, we sat around the campfire, and when we ran out of conversation topics, Owen suggested we tell scary stories. After a couple of sarcastic, joking stories, my mom piped up. Did I ever tell you guys the family scary story? My dad immediately gave her a meaningful look and shook his head at her. Of course, this aroused our curiosity. What? What is it? Howie asked. My dad shook his head even more adamantly. Don't tell him, Carol. It's not worth it. It's not that bad, right? My mom contested. What? Is it real or something? I don't understand. I said, furrowing my brows at the two of them. My mom sighed. We don't know if it's real, but it very well could be. It's a story that my grandma passed down to my mother, then to my brother and I. It's kind of gruesome. You guys have been too young to hear it yet, my dad added. I think they're old enough now, my mom said. My dad hesitated, then consented, so my mother began the story, telling it just the way it was told to her. As you know, my grandma was nicknamed Big Mama, since we called my mother Mama. Because of that, my great-grandmother, Big Mama's mother, was called Other Mama. I barely knew her, only as a little kid. Apparently Other Mama had 3 children, but her youngest daughter was always her favorite. Her name was Delia. She had a special connection to Delia. So when Delia contracted pneumonia and her health quickly deteriorated, Other Mama got really worried. Back in those days, people died of pneumonia much more often because there weren't as many good medicines and doctors. So Delia continued to get sicker and sicker until one day, she died. Other Mama was heartbroken. Delia was buried on the property, near the house where Other Mama and the rest of the family lived. Other Mama wanted to keep Delia close. Eventually, after not too long, Other Mama and the family had to move away to a new house in a new part of the country. Other Mama insisted on taking Delia's coffin with them and reburying it on the new property because she just couldn't bear to leave the burying place of her favorite daughter behind while they took off for a different state. So Delia's coffin was dug back up again to be moved to the new house. When the coffin had been dug up, Other Mama's curiosity overtook her. She wanted to see her baby girl one more time. She needed to see her. So she had them open up the casket again. Inside was Delia, but Delia's mouth was wide open. Her eyes were bulging open, and her hands were up in her hair pulling at it. She was frozen, dead like that. Horror and disgust had silenced my brothers and I for a moment. Why did she look like that? Howie asked, trying to act unbothered. My mother shrugged. Well, you know, back when they didn't have the machines that they have these days to detect brain waves and brain activity after they think someone has died, so... I realized what she was trying to say. What had happened to Delia. So you're saying they thought she was dead and buried her, but she was still alive. My mom paused, shifting uncomfortably. Apparently she was most likely in a small coma when they pronounced her dead, so she woke up later, underground. No one slept that night. The horror I felt from that story was different from the horror I felt watching a scary movie or reading a ghost story online. There was no reason here for me to believe it wasn't true. And this even happened in my own family. I felt the reality of it in my own veins. That night, I dreamt that I was in a coffin, 6 feet underground, struggling to breathe and raising my hands into my hair in desperate panic.